Welcome, everyone. Welcome to At the Stoa, where we bring cool humans who are working on interesting problems and ideas and movements, and we like to give them the time to share their work and their stories, whether this be researchers, entrepreneurs, movement builders, community builders, anything in between. So just as background, in ancient Greece, a stoa is where thinkers and innovators would gather to discuss new philosophies, unconventional beliefs, and pioneering ideas. Unfortunately, since the Renaissance, the stoa has disappeared for social culture focus and exists only behind closed doors and is accessible to a select few. And this is why we've created this talk series at the stoa. Here, we're not afraid to share new perspectives, ideas, or walks of life. We see contrast, controversy, and discussion as a pillar of who we are, so that we can share the narratives that you may have never been able to see previously. We're a series hosted by the Innovation Boost Zone at Toronto Metropolitan University, previously Ryerson University. It will take me some time to get used to that. The Innovation Boost Zone is an early stage startup incubator built in the heart of downtown Toronto. If you are an entrepreneur or intrapreneur, I highly recommend you check out the Innovation Boost Zone. You can easily search for the website, innovationboostzone.com. And if you're at all interested in the world of entrepreneurship, I highly recommend you get in touch with them. So today is a very special recording. We've brought on Rotem. Rotem is a lot of things. Not only is just an interesting human being, but his primary work happens in the field of psychology. He's the director of the Canadian Center for Psychedelic Science. He's got a bunch of publications on microdosing psychedelics and also some other unconventional beliefs that we might or might not get to by the end of the hour and a half or 2 hours or so. So without further ado, Rotem, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope I already didn't butcher your intro, but maybe in your own words, tell us about who you are, how you got here, and just maybe a bit of background on who Rotem is.
Sure, that's kind of a big question. I'm going to try and keep it interesting. So I would define myself as a clinician scientist. I do therapy, but I also do science. And my main focus is actually not so much the subject matter, but more about how to do the science right. And I think that this is something that a lot of people, scientists and lay people alike, we just assume that scientists know what they're doing, and that's why they're scientists. But the fact is that there's not a lot of very structured training to become a scientist. You take courses, you read books and articles, you learn about knowledge, but you're not so much taught how to make knowledge. And paired with the current climate where there's this phenomenon called publish or perish, where people need to publish as many papers as possible or they disappear, it creates a situation where a lot of the science is actually not so high quality. And that's why a lot of the time you hear about things that we thought we knew, and then all of a sudden it's totally different. Like how all of a sudden you hear that cheese gives you cancer. And it was fine before, and it may not even cause you cancer. It's just a really sexy headline. So people publish it. So I care a lot about doing the science right. I care about how the facts we find should stand the test of time. And in order to do that, I think there's a whole variety of tools to do, broadly called open science, but that's a lot of what I care about. And so I brought that into psychedelics several years ago. And people are way too excited about psychedelics, it appears, to actually do that. At least for now, people just want to publish already, and they don't want to. I think maybe some people are okay with cutting corners. And so that's kind of the science part. For the therapy part, I think this is also something that I've increasingly become more and more interested in, because it's just unbelievable the kind of impact you can have working with individuals, really helping them find their own truth wherever they need to go. I've been finding that extremely rewarding, and yeah, I'm a huge fan. So if people are listening and they may not be in therapy, I think you should seek therapy. It's great for pretty much everyone. I'm a big fan.
Okay, you threw in a lot that I want to dig deeper into.
Mm.
Let's start with doing science right. There's a big fake news problem,
Yeah.
where it's easier to get a headline, and getting people to click on stuff is much more important than sharing the truth. And I'm not sure most people care about the truth. It's more so people care about a story around a truth. Do you find that doing science has become harder? I know it's science is a very general thing, but maybe in your own line of research, have you found that doing science is harder these days than it has been historically?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a junior researcher. I've only been doing this for, I don't know, maybe 8 years. So what do I know? But if it's harder, but I can tell you that actually, I think the analogy to fake news is excellent, because being a scientist is increasingly more of just being a journalist, where you create the story. It's kind of like gonzo journalism. And I mean, people, they need to publish because they need to advance their careers. And then what matters is that the headline it'll grab you. The story is good. And if the journalistic methods are a little sketchy, nobody's going to catch it anyway. Everyone's too busy. And most of the time, they're right. From time to time, someone like me comes around, and I'm currently writing a review about all the experimental studies on microdosing in the current wave. And it's been a lot of work. It's still not done. But yeah, it's pretty terrifying how bad the science is. I ask people for their data, they say no. I ask them for how they did what they did, they say no. When people do say yes, and I try and replicate their analyses, I find different results some of the time. People are cutting corners so much. And I mean, there's no incentive to do anything differently, because this is how the system is set up. If you want to become a professor, you need a lot of publications. If you're gonna have a lot of publications, you got to do it quick. If you're gonna do it quick, you can't invest in quality. It's quantity over quality.
Yeah, there was this, I think it was someone tried replicating a bunch of Nature publications, and out of hundreds, they could only replicate 29, I believe, or something like less than 30.
Yeah.
And that was terrifying to see.
Yes, you're absolutely right. This was supposed to have started the replication crisis, which is now still what many people refer to it as. This paper you're referring to is from 2011. So it's been over 10 years. A team of scientists from different universities, different labs, tried to replicate 100 of the most canonical psychology studies. And like you said, they were able to replicate, if I remember correctly, 63 publications did not replicate. More than half. That is terrifying. That should cause the collapse of the field, or at least serious changes in how we do things. And it didn't really. In fact, when I started my graduate degree, I was working with a researcher who I told this person, I said, if I'm going to work with you, we have to do it right. We have to do open science. We have to pre-register our hypotheses, which means we need to say what we're going to do before we do it. If people ask us for our data, we have to share it. Just very basic stuff. And this person said, no, I'm scared. What if people steal my ideas? I won't be able to be creative with my research. Just people are opposed to change, even when it's obvious that the change is for the better. So, there's a saying attributed to Max Planck. I don't think he actually said it, but it says, science advances one funeral at a time. You just got to wait.
That's great. That's great.
Okay. I love that. That's great. I'm saying it's terrifying.
No, I'm just saying that was well worded. And there's some irony to also You don't know if Max Planck was the one who said it. There's some
Exactly.
story believing aspect there to it. So
Yeah.
it was funny on multiple levels. Let's talk about your work in psychedelics, because I think that's how we originally started talking. So for the layman or the layperson who doesn't know what psychedelics are, let's just start there.
That's
What are
already an excellent
psychedelics?
question, because there's no hard and fast definition for what a psychedelic is. Psychedelic, in fact, is a word that was coined by a Canadian, Humphrey Osmond, in the 50s. He was doing really interesting work out of Saskatchewan, and there was a debate. There were a few words that they were thinking of using. Anyway, they stuck with psychedelic. Classical psychedelics, at least what Osmond and others were referring to, were magic mushrooms, or more specifically psilocybin, which is the active molecule in magic mushrooms, LSD, which was discovered by Albert Hofmann in the earlier half of the 20th century. And then DMT, which is not frequently used on its own, but it's the more active part of what's called ayahuasca. And then mescaline, which is the substance that is in San Pedro cactus and a couple of other plants. So these substances cause visual hallucinations, sometimes other hallucinations. They cause very intense psychological experience, ranging from, if you smoke DMT, it's 10 to 15 minutes, and mescaline could last maybe 14 hours. So there's a good range there. And I mean, there's a lot to say about these substances. For example, the molecule serotonin, which is so important to a variety of functions in our brain and our peripheral nervous system, was discovered following the discovery of psychedelics, because psychedelics are so similar to serotonin. So yeah, psychedelics, that's what they originally meant. Although nowadays, some people also include MDMA under the umbrella of psychedelics. And there are also other, what's referred to as designer drugs that may also be psychedelic. Although for me, I am quite content only including classical psychedelics in this definition, largely because other substances like MDMA, 3-MMC, 2CB, they have a substantial harm profile. You could OD on these drugs, whereas ODing on LSD or mushrooms is inconceivable. You'd have to eat, I don't remember, something like 30 kilograms of mushrooms to overdose, which is inconceivable.
Right. So why have these class of drugs, psychedelics, taken such a liking or growth in popularity? Is it the Michael Pollan effect because he wrote a book and everybody got behind it? Is it something else? Because I remember, when I was in, grade school and high school, it's like what we were told is all drugs are terrible. Don't ever go near them. And now I'm talking to somebody who researches these drugs for, different clinical uses and use cases. So let's start with what's created the popularity of psychedelics over the past little while.
Yeah, well, I don't know is the short answer. The longer answer, I could speculate. By the way, it's interesting. I was just chatting with a colleague who was looking at what's taught in schools in Saskatchewan. And she mentioned that they're still taught that cannabis is a gateway drug that will for sure lead to terrible drugs that will kill you. And that is weird because cannabis is legal in Canada now. So that program certainly needs an update. So I think in the context of what brought about this interest in psychedelics, I think it's probably, like anything else, like any other historical process, many factors. I think one important factor is that there has not been a significant addition to the psychiatrist's toolkit since probably the early 70s, since the discovery of the SSRIs, right?
And just for the broader crowd, SSRIs are more commonly known as antidepressants.
Sure, SSRIs often are prescribed as antidepressants. They're serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Famous ones are like escitalopram, or yeah, I'm not coming up with any other names, but yeah, they're normally they're kind of like our first and last line of defense right now for depression. And at the same time, even though there have been no significant innovations, mental health has been getting increasingly worse in the last few decades, frighteningly so. I don't remember any of the statistics right now in particular, but a lot of people are going to suffer from some kind of mental health concern in their lifetimes, and there's not a lot we can do about it. We can give them a drug that works for maybe, like SSRIs work for current estimates, 30 to 40% of the population. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. But it leaves the majority of the population just feeling bad. So I think the need for something new was very, very present. And I think that this trend, I mean, this is not even a speculation. I think this trend has been driven largely by mental health providers that were working underground because they were so desperate that they were willing to risk their license, their livelihood, to help people in untraditional ways. And it was commonly known for a long time, since the first wave of psychedelics research, that there's a lot of potential. There was, for example, research done out of Canada that showed a lot of promise for using LSD to treat substance use disorder with alcohol. It was very, very promising. So we knew a lot of this stuff already, but since these drugs became criminalized, people didn't want to take risks, but I think time has come.
Just to get my timing right here, this is back in what, the 60s, 70s?
Yeah, this is the 50s, 60s.
Okay.
And then they were criminalized, dormant for a few decades. I guess until now, they're still criminalized. But now the research is back. And again, I think the trend was mostly driven by underground therapists who were seeing benefits in their clients. And then it just spread like wildfire. So to sum that up, I think increased demand for mental health innovation, and decreasing wellness in the general population. I think I argue, there's a paper I wrote called Microdosing as a Response to the Meaning Crisis, where I suggest that what's going on is that people lack meaning. We used to live for our country, for our village, for our religion, for our family, for something outside of us. And we have become very, very secularized. And it's had, I think, positive effects, but it has also removed things that are absolutely necessary for the human mind to flourish. We need some kind of something outside of us to make us feel meaningful, to point us in the right direction, to get us out of bed in the morning. And I think for a couple of decades, most Western, I don't know if thinkers, but at least lay people thought that it's just about fun, like hedonic good times. You make money, you get a big house, you eat good food, and that should make you happy. And yet everyone knows people who are wealthy seem to have everything and they're unhappy. It's not about that, or at least that might be a necessary condition, but not sufficient. Need more. And I think that psychedelics are giving people a sense of meaning. It makes us feel like, I guess, I think Michael Pollan actually said it well. It's like people have access to a sacrament without having to go through some kind of priest. You take a large amount of whatever drug and you feel like you're in touch with the sublime. And I think it might be valuable for people.
Okay. There's a lot in there that I want to unpack. Let's start with that paper that you referenced. Actually, even before that. Meaning, how are you defining meaning?
You should join my team. We should do science together because you ask all the right questions. It's meaning is a very poorly defined concept. We don't know what it is. And I can't tell you. It's one of those things, you know how there's this adage about pornography. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. So I think meaning is kind of like that. A sense of meaning is something that is felt, and when we talk about it, we know what we mean. But if you want to measure it quantitatively, rigorously, you're going to run up against a lot of issues because it's really not obvious what it is.
Well, I don't mean quantitatively, even qualitatively. Let's describe it. That way we have something we can latch onto. So I'm not per se asking for a quantitative definition yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, I mean, we can workshop it together. I can tell you kind of my opinion. I think that a sense of meaning is about, it's kind of like, so, you know, before I was doing this, I was studying boredom. I published this paper about mindfulness and boredom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most important thing I learned from that is that boredom is not a real thing. It's not a thing in the world. It's not a quantity. Nothing is inherently boring. We are bored by stuff. It's subjective things. Like something that could be really interesting to you could be boring to me. Mm-hmm. And it's more about our state of mind, I guess. So I think by the same token, meaning is more like, it's more a state of mind. It's caring about something. I think meaning and caring are closely related because your mind, you know how it is, the things we see through our eyes receive an infinite or near infinite amount of information, and our brain somehow, magically, I don't think that it's understood how, intelligently ignores everything that it doesn't need to notice and only passes on the stuff that we need to notice. What do we need to notice? The stuff that is salient to us. How do we know it's salient? Because we notice it. And then it's just kind of circular. Right. So if you're thirsty, you are much more likely to notice water in the room than if you're not thirsty, right? So I think that if you are in a state of searching for meaning, or I don't like searching for meaning because that's maybe a little different. A search for meaning could be beneficial, but it could also there's a scale called search for meaning. And search for meaning is actually related to negative mental health outcomes because it implies that you don't have meaning if you're searching for meaning. So I think it's more like if you are a meaning-oriented person, you will find meaning. And it might be that psychedelics enhance that part of our mind.
I see. Does it also, you think, create a need? Or is the need for meaning is what's causing the mental health crisis? I don't like to use such a strong word, but it's just what.
Oh, it's a crisis, my friend. I mean, please, I don't mean to put words in your mouth. You use whatever you're comfortable with, but things are very, very bad.
How so? Sorry, we're jumping topics here, but this is interesting.
So I remembered a stat: 1 out of 6 people on planet Earth will have debilitating depression at least once in their lives. So
wow, that is a big number.
Everyone knows at least one person who is very depressed, right? Anxiety is everywhere as well. And I mean, depression and anxiety they're comorbid like 80%. So it makes sense that you would find both. Our whole approach to mental health is kind of weird. This is a whole other conversation. But yes, things are really bad. And I think if things weren't so bad, I mean, when was the last time? I guess maybe cannabis is an example of this, that the government said, you know what, this was really illegal, but we are just going to change our mind about this and let this fly. But I think with cannabis, there was a strong monetary incentive. And it was very, very, very obvious that cannabis is largely harmful. or sorry, harmless is what I meant to say.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with psychedelics, we don't have a lot of research. It's kind of unclear what's going on. We don't understand the mechanism. We don't really know what the long-term effects are, at least of chronic administration. And yet governments are just jumping on the bandwagon because the effect sizes for mental health are unbelievable. So they're just saying, no, let's go with it.
So it's you think the government is looking to make a bet and saying, look, the mental health crisis is so bad. Psychedelics could be a potential solution, although we don't know yet. Let's take that gamble just because the problem is so massive and I want to take multiple shots at goal. And this is one potential shot at goal.
Yes, although the Canadian government, as per usual, is more conservative than, say, the American government, where I think it's also because states maybe have more power. And also we have many of the premiers right now in Canada are conservative and maybe they wouldn't want to risk it. But I can tell you that I met with Ontario's Associate Minister of Mental Health last year, and he was very, very enthusiastic about the possibility of having psychedelics be part of a rehab clinic that he was interested in opening. So I think, yeah, folks of all stripes are very enthusiastic about this. And it's because, like I said, again, my opinion is that you have a huge problem and it appears to be a very powerful solution. So you're willing to make sacrifices, maybe.
Okay, let's jump to the solution side for a minute here, or maybe a few. I'm going to ask you a really unfair question, and take any angle of this that you feel comfortable with. And given that you're doing a review paper, maybe this is actually really timely. What is the state of clinical psychedelic research? What has happened? I know there was a big gap, for a few decades, but I know it's taken some type of a phoenix effect where a lot of it is coming back. Can you give us a summary at the highest level of where psychedelic research is at? What are the clinical use cases that different researchers are going after? And what are the unanswered questions that folks either are working on or you believe that we out as a researcher community to be working?
Yeah, actually, just before we started this interview, I saw that the American APA, I don't know if it was the Psychology or Psychiatric Association, they said they released a statement basically saying, yeah, psychedelics are cool. We fully support research, but we think that there is still not enough evidence to use them in clinical environments because more research is required. And I agree with that. I think that psychedelics show a ton of promise. Like, if you read the papers, some of the effect sizes observed are off the charts. It's amazing. They seem so powerful. And I'm very hopeful about them. And I'm not just hopeful for clinical reasons. And I mean, there's a lot. Let me answer your question. They show promise for depression, anxiety, OCD, anorexia, end-of-life distress, a slew of other disorders. We and my team and I will be studying persistent depressive disorder, which is extremely difficult to treat. People are working on this on a variety of indications. Looks very promising. But in addition, psychedelics are showing promise for kind of the flourishing side of things. They seem to enhance creativity, productivity. They help people with sleep sometimes. Just a variety with mindfulness, a variety of things that we haven't even measured yet because we don't know what to look for. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's something to be said about how this again goes back to the meaning crisis and the comment I made before about how I think that the way we do mental health is kind of weird because we very clearly demarcate. There's clinical stuff and then there's everything else that we don't care about. We just need to get you well enough so that you can get up and go to work every day. After that, you do you. And I think that in reality, wellness and mental health, good or bad, they're like inextricably linked. It's part of the same thing. You can't just pull one piece aside and say, I'm only going to treat this. So you can't give, like if someone's, there's honestly so many things, but yeah, I think two things that I want to say here. One, if someone's material conditions are bad, and they have good reasons to be depressed, giving them drugs is not going to make them not depressed, because you need to give them a roof and food and things that will make them feel like they're a productive member of society. And an excellent segue to this is other things that people need are a sense of meaning and a creative outlet and social relationships. We all need these things. And if we won't get these things, we will be miserable. I think that psychedelics do not give you these things. They will not put a head over your, or a roof over your head, and they will not create a creative outlet for you, but they will make you seek out these things, maybe. Certainly more that flourishing aspect. Psychedelics will make you realize that you have been a jerk to your friends and you need to stop that. Or it'll make you understand that you need to seek out new friends. It will remind you of how you want to play guitar. You really should, that guitar that's in the corner of your room, you should pick it up. And I think that what's
funny you mentioned that. I literally just put my ukulele away.
There you go. So yeah, I think that's what we need to, and I suspect I hope that what will come out of this psychedelic revolution we're currently experiencing, the psychedelic renaissance, is that we will understand that in order to be well, the angle is not to remove the bad things, because there are bad things in life, always. The angle is to add good things. I don't remember what you asked. This was a long tirade.
Yeah, I'll go back to what I asked, but this is a good direction as well. I not too recently was talking to a friend who was going through a tough time, and she had told me yeah, she was battling some depression, some anxiety, and she had said, if I didn't need to be a functional member of society, I would love to just swim in my anxiety and depression and just explore the nooks and crannies of my brain. But there's this pressure to go out there and be a functional member of society, and that's what makes it tough. It's not depression or anxiety itself. Is that what you meant by what you said about earlier, of like we're so we're told we need to be these therapy just gets us to a point of we're good enough such that we can go operate in society again. Is that where you were going with that?
Not exactly. So first of all, what your friend said, that sounds like that's the evolutionary explanation right now for why depression even exists. It exists to tell us to stop what we're doing and think about why things are bad and how to make them better. But your friend sounds like is so overwhelmed by her responsibilities and work that she doesn't have time and like the energy to stop and think and change what's going on for her. And I expect that psychedelics would make that even more salient. Like that's what they do. I think what I was referring to is more that here's an example. I live right by CAMH, which is a large mental health hospital. And I have spoken to some psychiatrists and I see folks around here. The way the system works is that if someone comes in and they're in really bad shape, what they do is they get them back on their feet. And then they tell them to leave already, because what are they going to do? There's nothing else to do. There's no support systems. There's no, here's housing, here's food, here's a job, or like, here's how you can apply for a job, here's new clothes. There's nothing. There's just, and then people keep coming back with the same like psychotic episodes that were induced by using too many drugs or suicidal depression or so many other things, because what we need is not just to be treated enough so that we can go to work. We need to be given the things that are actually necessary for our quality of life.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go back to the original question. So I get the mental health crisis and how psychedelics can play a role in that. And you started answering, you were talking about how psychedelics can potentially be used for these conditions like PTSD and anxiety, depression and anorexia and so on and so forth. But then you also mentioned that they could be used for improved creativity and improved productivity. What research has been conducted in each of these areas? Like what data do we have so far that makes you so hopeful?
Right. So I think yeah, I for sure want to talk about that because the research is bad. Like I said, the research about psychedelics is bad. It's bad for, I don't even know why. I have my theory about why it's bad. But the research is bad. In fact, I think at least for microdosing, it's so bad that it's as good as anecdotes. So I think that we should be hopeful, first of all, because why not? Hope is a good thing to feel. But I think that the findings are promising. They're not more than promising. They're not confirming anything. There's so much scientific malpractice, and I don't think it's kind of out of the scope of this conversation to say too much about it. But to give just one example, honestly, there's so many. What's one good example? People, actually, yeah, I don't know where to start. People don't plan what they're going to do. And then actually, here's a story for you. Let's say you meet me by the side of the road and you offend me for some reason. And I say, "Oh, Harry, you better be careful. I'm the best shot in all of Ontario." And you say, "Oh yeah, well, why should I believe that?" And I say, "Oh yeah, Harry, well, you should come back to my house. Let me show you something." And you agree and you come back to my house. And on my house, there are a bunch of holes in my house, bullet holes, and around each hole is a bullseye. Would that convince you that I'm the best shot in all of Ontario?
No, you could have drawn it there afterwards.
Exactly. So this is what people do in science and specifically in psychedelics. They don't plan anything. And then whatever they find, they say, "Oh yes, this is what I planned to find. This is perfect."
So, okay, I get that the science is bad.
Yeah.
And I'm with you there. But looking forward, like, what is the promise? Why is this? What have we seen so far in research or maybe even anecdotal stuff you might have come across that makes this area of research promising? Like, why is it able to treat or potentially treat things like anxiety?
Right. So those are two different questions. So why is it promising? Because even with all the scientific malpractice, people are still fine. There's something there. It's just that the effect size may be exaggerated. It may not work for everyone. There's all these considerations, but it appears that it might be effective for all of these disorders. And I'm very hopeful, and I'm hoping that sooner or later, people are going to start doing better science so that we can definitively answer these questions. And that's what I'm aiming to do. I have a colleague from Australia that's going to start soon a microdosing study that's going to have something like 270 participants. That is a good study. And I know that he's going to do good work because I'm familiar with his practices and he's not so sketchy like most people. So I think, again, to say that the reason there's hope is because A, the science, bad as it is showing that. And I guess B, as you said, there's so many anecdotes. Even if it's all placebo, great. That is powerful. And I think that people should keep doing this because at least if used from time to time, not frequently, there's no evidence that it's harmful. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of hope. I think most people who are probably listening to this right now either have used psychedelics or know people who have used psychedelics, and they are aware of the hype. I think that at least part of this hype is artificial or, does not reflect reality, but at least part of this hype is for real. At least part of what people are saying about psychedelics is based in reality. So that's why I'm hopeful.
Okay. And for the layperson who might have not heard about psychedelics or hasn't gotten caught up in the hype, what is a psychedelic experience like? I know it's different for everyone, and it's different on based on the drugs that you mentioned that you ingest, but and feel free to reference papers or anecdotes or qualitative data, but what is a psychedelic experience, and why does that lead to, whether you want to take the creativity productivity angle or whether you want to take the anxiety, depression, or PTSD? So how does it lead to solving or working on those types of things?
So we don't know yet if you need a psychedelic experience for any of it. It could be purely pharmacological. It could be just the drug doing something to your brain like any other drug. And this is an angle that people are quite interested in. There's a study that's going to start hopefully soon out of CAMH that's going to use psychedelics, but also blockers for a specific receptor so that people will take psychedelics and not have hallucinations to see if they still get the benefit. Of course, I'm sure you've noticed by now, I have opinions about this. This is one design, shall we say. But so first, I just want to preface everything else by saying, we don't know if you need the psychedelic experience at all. And I mean, this is the use case for microdosing, because if microdosing works and microdosing is a subhallucinogenic dose, then it might be that the trip is just kind of added and you don't need that. And some people like it and that's good for them. But if you don't like it, you may not need it. What is it like? I mean, people are, I think the common word that is used for this is ineffable. And so it does not lend itself to words. It's just out there. I think maybe for me, something that helped was a more physiological explanation. So psychedelics are, and again, when I say psychedelics, I'm referring to classical psychedelics, not MDMA, not any of the other substances. They are serotonin, a certain kind of serotonin agonist. Serotonin is all around the brain, but this specific kind is, a lot of it is in the front and in the back. In the front, you have your prefrontal cortex. That's kind of like it has a lot of the executive functioning. It tells you who you are, what to do now, and how the world is. It's where your kind of ideas about how the world and yourself lives, I guess. And so it turns that off. And so all of a sudden, you're not so sure who you are and what the world is, and everything you thought about the world may not be true. And so things look different because you're used to seeing them. Like I said before, normally your brain ignores everything and only sees things through a certain lens, and that lens is removed. And all of a sudden you see everything, or you see more. And so things look different, things look weird. It's not like you see pink elephants, but like this water bottle, all of a sudden I'm going to notice its color all of a sudden, or the shape is going to remind me of something. So stuff like that. In addition, because it affects your occipital cortex or occipital lobe behind the back of your brain, that's where your vision is. And it just kind of adds a bunch of firing there. So it actually causes some visual hallucinations. Frequently, it's not very clear stuff. There's something that people refer to as tracers, where you just you see stuff kind of floating. But I think, yeah, these two things together, they just kind of make the world becomes a very, very interesting place, and your thoughts become very interesting because they're less constrained. I've heard, actually my colleague was interested in whether there's a function of another part of the brain called thalamic gating. Your thalamus kind of, a lot of information comes through it. And she was suggesting that it might have to do with that. It might not. We don't know so much about it.
It prevents activity in the thalamus such that you're getting less information.
You're getting everything, just like an outpour of
Oh, I
information.
see. Okay.
So yeah, we don't exactly understand how it works yet. There's paper by Robin Carhart-Harris and Carl Friston called the Rebus model. I think it has a lot of merit. I think a lot of things about it need to change and will change, but I think they did some very heavy lifting in creating this model. A lot of it is stuff that kind of anyone who uses psychedelics already knows, but it's useful, and people who are interested in it, it's very dense, but people who are interested in it, that's a good paper to read.
The famous study that I think Michael Pollan also popularized this, but others also, is the Stanford study where and it was a very qualitative questionnaire where they took 36 students and they asked them a bunch of questions at the end of what your experience was, what your experience was like, what did you learn, and so on and so forth. But I never really understand the method of a lot of these trials. So just because maybe I'm not a scientist in this area, I don't know enough, but also a lot of it just seemed vague, at least in the publications that I've come across. So maybe for the layperson like me, how, presumably it's not like, hey, here, take this piece of LSD and we'll see you in 12 hours or whatever amount of time. How are trials like this organized? What's the actual experience like?
I should say, so my trial has, we have started pre-screening, but we have not started running participants yet. This will have been my first trial. So everything I tell you is what I think and imagine and hearsay. I don't have experience. What I do know, I can tell you first of all, the reason, so the first wave of psychedelic research, like we have advanced a lot since then in terms of our methods and our statistical analysis. So a lot of what you read about back in the day is stuff that, that just they were trying their best with the tools they had available. But right now, when you read it compared to what we have now, it reads like, yeah, whatever, maybe. Like you said, very vague and nebulous. Contemporary studies they of course include a qualitative component, especially when there's mental health involved, because I think there's a lot that we can't capture with quantitative questionnaires. So certainly there are a lot of questions that are asked. And by the way, this is another place where open science ought to play a role, because if you use open science, then you say which questions you're going to ask. You document all of that, and then people can ask the same questions in subsequent studies and compare results with yours. However, that is not what most people do. So we don't even know what the protocols are for most of these studies. At the same time, the FDA, where I think they were playing kind of fast and loose back in the day in the original wave of psychedelic research, they are very strict now. So researchers have to, at least in terms of participant safety, researchers have to plan everything very, very carefully. So people are not just given the drug and they're told, okay, see ya. It's more like we know how many sessions of therapy they're going to get before they get the substance, and we know what they're going to do while they're on the substance. In the original wave of research, a lot of people were taking a lot of drugs and then being confined to a hospital bed. Not pleasant. Now it's more like the space is kind of manicured and prepared for a psychedelic experience. Although, again, what does that entail? It's not clear. A couple of people have spoken about context. I currently have a paper under review about the importance of context in microdosing. But by and large, these are just the things that scientists decided that they like, and that's what they want when they're tripping. So that's what they're going to have for other people that are tripping. I think an excellent example of that, by the way, and incredibly culturally insensitive, is a lot of these scientists are kind of like into, Eastern philosophy, man. And so they like having a little statue of the Buddha there because that's kind of like cool, man. And that doesn't work for everyone, right? There's different people with different backgrounds. And I think, yeah, it's a lot of it is top down and poorly thought out.
So there don't exist like SOPs of like, hey, here are the therapy sessions that should happen beforehand. And after this point, they're now allowed to then ingest the drug. It's not, there's no SOPs.
So increasingly there are standards of care, but they're established in precedent form and not in like research driven. So for example, I'm not familiar, there might be studies, but I'm not familiar with a study that said, we're going to look at whether people need 4, 6, or 8 sessions of therapy before ingesting psychedelics. We're going to see if, here's an excellent example. One of the things that are most irksome to me, there's always music, because we have decided that music is an important part of the psychedelic experience. And the researchers decide what the music is. And there's a little bit of research now starting about different playlists, but there is no research, as far as I know, where there's no music, which is unbelievable. Like, you have to have a control group.
Yeah, what about the scientific method of no control?
Ask, okay. I know, other people, I can't tell you.
Okay.
So things are bad, Harry.
So, okay, I think you're using the word bad too ethereally. Maybe it's just we're early.
Yes, I think that's totally fair. And I appreciate that pushback. This is an immature discipline. And yeah, I'm hoping that it'll mature, but so I wrote this paper it was published in 2020, I wrote it in 2019, called Polishing the Looking Glass, about how we need to be doing everything very well now, because you know how they say that scientists stand on the shoulders of giants? We are those giants. We are the first in this current wave. We can rely a little bit on what people were doing in the 50s and 60s, but this is it. We are laying a foundation, and people are laying a bad foundation. It's rickety, it's unsound, and people are going to build on our findings, and our findings aren't worth shit. So I think this is my concern. Yes, it's immature, the discipline, but I have a concern that it will just, it'll be a bubble because it's just expanding with nothing, no substance that's going to pop.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Actually, we've got a question in the chat. They say, Master Fazy says, interested to know more about the link between psychedelics and neurogenesis. If known, does it play a role in promising results for psychological studies?
Yeah, neurogenesis is tough to measure because, well, to measure directly, what you have to do is you have to cut someone's...
Before answering the question, maybe even, what is neurogenesis? Let's
start. Sure. Neurogenesis is the phenomenon of growing new neurons. It used to be, the conventional wisdom in neuroscience used to be that you have a certain amount of neurons and that's it. That's all you have for life. And every time you hit your head, a few neurons die and you're never going to get them back. In the last maybe couple of decades, it has become evident that there is spontaneous neurogenesis or growth of new neurons in the brain. And then as soon as that became kind of consensus, it's a huge thing. Everyone wants more neurons. Everyone wants their brain to work better, or at least not deteriorate. So everyone wants that neurogenesis. Of course, in psychedelics, it makes sense if you think about it. even from not from a layperson's, like from a scientific perspective, it makes sense that it would open new channels of thinking. And at least in terms of the way it works when you look at it through functional neuroimaging, people's brains behave differently under the influence. Different parts of the brain that don't normally talk to each other start talking to each other. Makes sense that there would be neurogenesis. It's been an area of much speculation for the last few years. And what I started saying before is that it's tough to measure neurogenesis directly because you have to cut people's heads open and look at their brains, and you'd be killing them, and that's kind of a bad thing to do, arguably illegal. And so when looked at in rat models, it appears to, yes, it elicits neurogenesis. That's very promising because rats are somewhat similar to us. There's also other indirect ways of measuring it, like stuff in your cerebrospinal fluid, and it appears in a few studies, it appears to increase those hormone levels, and that may mean, yes, it does cause neurogenesis. But if you've been listening for the last hour, you have heard me talk about how the research is still very, very young, and we need to think about it more as this is promising and not this is it.
Okay, there's more questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna keep them coming.
Sure.
Before I switch topics, so there's some other stuff I want to hit out. Have you watched, I haven't watched this, but How to Change Your Mind on Netflix?
No.
Okay, sorry, Dust Moon. Neither of us have seen it, but maybe I'll add it to my reading, my watching list. The other place I wanted to go, purely anecdotally now, because I'm making a lot of assumptions, given that I'm going to reference some anecdotal data. I've had friends who swear that their parent, who was a smoker for 30 years, did a trip of mushrooms, and then after their last cigarette, they never touched a cigarette again. So there's a lot of anecdotal stuff like that out there. And it totally makes sense now that these scientists are using a lot of their anecdotal data to then design the study with whether it be the Buddha, the music, or something else. If you were to redo, some of these trials, and obviously you have your own trial in the works here, what would you do differently?
How much time do we have?
Okay.
I'll try and be brief.
Let's do.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I think the most important thing is open science by a wide margin. Everything has to be out in the open. Things, instead of you coming to my house and seeing the holes in my walls and the bullseyes around them, everyone needs to see that there's a bullseye and then I hit it. Because otherwise, I could have just gotten my results by chance, and that means nothing. This is by far the most important thing. If people listening right now, if you remember nothing from this talk, the only thing that is important is if it's not open science, please be skeptical. That is the first and foremost thing. After that, I think another important thing is, since this is an unconventional area of study, we need to use conventional methods. So if we're gonna measure, for example, I don't know, whether people's depression symptoms get better, we should use a tried and true measure that has been used in the literature before. We shouldn't just come up with our own thing and use that and see if it works, because we don't know if our instrument is good. We should use instruments that we already know work. That's another issue with much of the literature. Another one, which is, it's difficult. I acknowledge it's difficult to run these studies. It's difficult to get people into the lab. Yes, but we need more people in each study. This has to do with experimental power, again, outside of the scope of this conversation. But without enough participants, it means that we may not be detecting important effects, and the effects we do detect may be either by chance or exaggerated. Is there anything else that's important?
On that point, do you have, now that you're doing registration for your trial, are you finding it tough to get registrants?
No, like to recruit participants?
Yeah, to recruit.
No, people are, you may not know this, but people are super into psychedelics.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's much more popular than I had thought. I mean,
oh yeah. I get a lot of cold emails every day from people who have either despaired of the mental health system and just feel like they've tried everything and they're willing to try anything. And a lot of people that Google either me or the trial, and they just really want to participate. So it's pretty, like, I hear a lot of really bad stories. It's really unfortunate.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You're going off on, or were you done?
Oh yeah, I think maybe one more thing. And this is, I don't know how important this is. I guess it's very important, actually. I'm seeing in many studies that people, they run their trial, they publish a paper, and the paper is carefully written. It has a lot of caveats where people say, yeah, but we only had so many people, but all of our participants were white, but all of our participants were young, all of our participants were male. Like, we can't infer, please be careful, we need to do more research. And then these people, the same researchers, go to the media and say, yes, this works for everyone, don't worry about it. So I think if researchers tempered the message a little bit, I think that would go a long way. I don't know if psychedelics are dangerous. They might not be dangerous at all, but they also, under certain circumstances, maybe they are dangerous. And maybe we should say, like, if you're going to do it anyway, go ahead and do it. Here's how you do harm reduction. But if you're debating doing it, consider that what we think we know, we maybe know. It's not like we 100% know that it's true. It's like 70%. So consider that.
And there's somebody listening here. I mean, yes, there might be a big part of the audience who've already tried psychedelics. I'm sure that there is a good portion of the audience who've never tried psychedelics, and now their interest is piqued because of either what they're hearing from you, or they might even have got caught up in some of the hype. Are there any harm reduction resources or anything that you believe that they should keep in mind if a therapist is giving them psychedelics under the table, or their friend invites them to the garage and like, hey, come try this, try X with me?
Yeah, I think that kind of the issue of I'm so angry that we criminalize people who use drugs, because it creates exactly these kinds of situations where people don't have access to resources, and drugs that could be completely harmless or potentially harmful, but not so harmful. People will, they may have a very negative experience, and then they will lie to a doctor at the hospital because they're scared of going to prison. By the same token, there's not a lot of validated harm reduction like practices or protocols out there. Two that I can think of, one is called the Zendo Project. It's something that MAPS have been doing. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They have been around since the year I was born, 1986. This is something they've been doing for a long time, and they have a manual. You can freely access it online. That's one good resource. A good Canadian resource, there's the folks out west, Therasil, who have been doing a lot of really good work to kind of advance, to be able to legally give people psychedelics, but also involved in a lot of different harm reduction. They're involved in safe injection sites in Vancouver, and they have good resources on their website too. So TheraSil and the Zendo project.
Okay, okay, that's a good list.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things I've noticed just in this conversation.
Oh, sorry, Harry, can I say a couple more things?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, because I was thinking, I wrote this paper a few years ago where we were part of the global drug survey. So there were many respondents, many thousands. A couple of things that I want to say, because I'm surely people who are listening to this also care about MDMA at least. First of all, on average, 80% of what's sold as MDMA contains no MDMA. Please test your substances. If you're going to use drugs, because they are illegal, they may have other things in them. There are test kits out there that are relatively inexpensive. You could buy them with friends. It's like $40. Please test your substances. MDMA could also have fentanyl in it. It could have a variety of things. Please be careful. That's one thing I want to say. And the other thing is, if you're going to use psychedelics, remember you can always say no. Until the moment that the psychedelic is in your body, you can always say, actually, I'm not feeling it. Be sensitive to how you're feeling. Consider set and setting, mental set, like if you're feeling good, if you're feeling ready for this, if you're feeling safe and cared for, and your setting, your physical setting. If you feel like this is an okay environment, you can lie down if you want, you can dance if you want, you can just be yourself. If you don't feel like things are just right, you can always say no, and there's nothing wrong with that. You will have more opportunities to use drugs. So please remember that.
Okay. Good list. So you seem like a pretty interdisciplinary guy. I've asked you what meaning is, and you've given me, you've given me your thoughts, which are still deep than most thoughts that a lot of folks have. And it's an untempered area of research. You looked at Western culture and how that leads to mental health. There's this idea of having understanding about multiple disciplines in order to do psychedelic research. It seems very interdisciplinary. You've even quoted some philosophers, by the way, like we see the world as we are, not as it is, type of thing. How does that help you? Does that sort of interdisciplinary thinking help you in your research? Is that important? Or is this just Rotem and you just work this way and you just happen to be researching this? Or do you think it goes hand in hand?
Yeah, I think, honestly, you know how you start taking yourself for granted because you live inside of you all the time and you don't think about it? So I think I didn't think about how I'm interdisciplinary so much. Like I used to think about this more earlier in my career. And then I think I became very specialized. I guess I'm specialized in terms of the subject matter now because I'm doing exclusively psychedelics research. But yeah, I consider myself a cognitive scientist, I guess. So I for sure draw from philosophy, from psychology. I'm interested in linguistics. And I think a lot about computer science. I read a lot of science fiction because I think it's really good to kind of, stretch your imagination. And I think that those things are very valuable when you're studying something that psychedelics don't quite lend themselves to the standard psychopharmacological framework where you just take the drug and the drug works and it makes you feel better and you move on with your life. There's so much more here and it's very exciting. And I think that depending on what your inclination is, I think a lot of people can do very, very good science about psychedelics without being interdisciplinary. I don't think it's at all necessary. I can't even tell you that this is a strength of mine necessarily. I've seen people do good stuff that they're just like, they're focused, they're an expert, they have their one way of viewing things, and they help everyone else learn more about that thing. I guess it just so happens that what I am interested in is, the human experience. This is also, I think, a part of why I love doing therapy. It's because I'm curious about what it is to be human. And I'm curious in ways that I don't think I can ever be satisfied. And it's fascinating. I'm thinking about therapy now. I love every time I start working with a new client, I love it because it's always going to be different. Even though sometimes, certain people are similar, certain things fall into the same kind of buckets. But every individual is so unique. It's so interesting. And when people open up slowly and you learn more about them, it's always so fascinating. And I think, by the same token, there's so much to be learned about the human condition and human experience through the study of psychedelics. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it. I am curious. I forget, I don't want to misattribute this quote, but someone famous, maybe someone in the audience would actually remember who said it, said that psychedelics would be to psychology what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy. And I think that is very, very cool and interesting. And I think that's where I'm at. So I'm not just interested in, does it make you feel better clinically? I'm not just interested in how do drugs work in the brain pharmacologically. I'm not just interested in how does it help you interact with other people, social psychology. I'm kind of like, I'm interested in everything. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. I'm very interdisciplinary. And I think, it makes me good. Like I'm a good team member because like right now I'm working with a team of a historian and a philosopher and a psychiatrist. And I'm the guy that kind of ties it all together because I know a little bit about everything.
That's fascinating. Very few research teams are sort of interdisciplinary.
Mm.
There's someone in the audience wondering, how do I join your team? So if you were to go back to tell a younger version of yourself, if there's a young researcher or somebody who wants to become a researcher, let's say, and wants to get into this area of research and pursue your line of career, what would you tell them?
I started with mindfulness before I did this, and I was so enthusiastic. I've been meditating since I was 19, so almost half my life by now. And I think it's an amazing thing. Meditation is so useful, so valuable. It has changed my life dramatically for the better. And I was so enthusiastic about studying it because I wanted to know how it works and how we can make it available to other people, and perhaps more effectively. And I really wanted to work with Norman Farb. He's a professor out of the University of Toronto. He's brilliant. I have so much respect for him. And he told me, not in so many words, I think he maybe should have said it in these words. He said, this is a flash in the pan. Stop. You don't want to be a mindfulness researcher. You don't want to be a psychedelics researcher. If things don't work out for that area, if it's, for example, like now, mindfulness is so saturated. Right, it was Groff. Thank you. I think if you want to study psychedelics, I think it shouldn't be about the psychedelics. It should be about whether you're interested and willing to have an academic career. If you are, I would encourage you to focus on methods. Be a methods person. Be an amazing statistician. You need to learn programming. Learning programming early on is an asset, regardless of what your pursuit is. In fact, this is kind of an aside, but I strongly believe that universities should require all undergrads to take Introduction to Philosophy so that people can learn critical thinking, and Introduction to Computer Science so that people can learn how to code even on a basic level, because these two things will, no matter what you do, they will be valuable. So if you want to get into research, learn how to code. It will make you a cut above the rest, 100%. In addition, work hard to publish. Don't work for free. You will absolutely, it'll be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for you to work for money. But if you are a research assistant and you're part of a project, ask the main person what you can do to be on the publication, be co-author. That will also make you much more competitive as an applicant if you want to work with me or anyone else if you want to go to graduate school. So these are the main things: computer science, statistics, try and publish.
What are your thoughts? That's great, by the way. I love that you were so specific and tactful about that. What are your thoughts about these private research foundations and research groups that are popping up? And I know it's not just in psychedelics, in other areas, like AI safety and blockchain research and so on. And maybe this tickling the anarchist in you, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on private research foundations that are operating outside of universities? Have you looked much at them?
I think so. It's different in different disciplines. I know that in economics, it's quite common. In psychology, you have companies that do like consulting work, but a lot of it is science driven, and they do essentially psychological research. Much of it doesn't get published, sadly. But this is, yeah, I mean, I think I've made it, perhaps I've not made it so clear. I don't have a lot of faith in university research in general. As long as people don't pre-register, as long as they have the perverse incentive to publish quantity over quality, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. So I don't, and I don't think that private research institutions are better or worse than that. I think as long as people pre-register their research, as long as they have, and as they do things ethically, then more power to them. I mean, I have been not getting paid by anyone over the last, I guess, few years to do the research that I'm currently doing. I'm just doing it because I'm really enthusiastic about it, and I think that it's really important. And I can tell you that it wouldn't matter. Had I been paid by anyone, it wouldn't have mattered what I'm doing. I would still, I can tell you actually that, I started doing psychedelics research pretty early on, and I got a lot of offers from various companies that wanted to hire me on as a consultant. And I just said, yeah, I'm totally happy to work with whoever. I'm pretty easy as long as open science. As long as I can publish everything that I find, nothing gets hidden, nothing is in the file drawer. And as long as I can work with whoever I want. So as long as I'm free to do science, I'm happy to work with whoever. So I can tell you that for me, at least, this wouldn't have changed. If someone approaches me now and says, here's $100,000 to keep doing what you're doing, why would I say no? Right?
That's very principled. I like that. I really, really like that. That's respectful. You're into meditation. A little bird told me you also done the Vipassana, the whole meditation retreat. What's the link between meditation? And you kind of touched on this 2 questions ago, but what's the link between meditation and psychedelics?
I don't
If at
know.
all.
There must be one. I don't know what it is yet. I think it's really interesting. I think I don't know how to talk about this in a way that won't be too speculative and too academic. I'm going to give it a go anyway.
Sure.
I think so. In my undergrad, I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I took a few courses with John Vervaeke. He is brilliant. He shaped much of how I think about cognitive science. And he has this model. He's very interested in meditation. He has this model of how when you do more, I guess, like breath meditation, focus meditation. So he has this graph of 4 quadrants, and one axis is from single action. I don't remember what it is this end. It's like the opposite of automatic functioning. So one end is being very automatic, just going with the flow. The other end is taking every single second at a time and being thoughtful.
Like intentional?
Sure, intentional. And then the other axis is between micro and macro. So micro is every object separately, and the macro is the gestalt, everything all together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you do, so according to his theory, the more you do focus practice, it takes you to the bottom left of the quadrant. So you're more focused on each individual moment, more intentional, as you said, and more about the details. So you sit there and you just notice every single tick of the clock. And it breaks down your automatic functioning. You start asking yourself, why do I do what I do? And how can I maybe do things differently? It makes you start doubting things. And it can go to lengths that are actually harmful. Like people who, I don't know, decide that they actually, they don't love their partner. They come back from meditation retreat. They're like, actually, I don't love you. This kind of love that I thought I have is a bad love, and I'm breaking up with you. And then a week later, they come to their senses and they realize that actually they just kind of overthought it. The other angle is you do contemplative practices, or loving kindness meditation is a good example of it, where you're just like kind of going with it. You're like, everything is great. I feel great. I'm going to keep the good stuff going. I'm going to think about all the things I love. And there you go with the flow, and it kind of balances in John Vervaeke's model, it balances the focus meditation. If we take the same model and apply it to psychedelics, I think that a lot of the time when just the psychedelic itself could be likened to the focus meditation, mm-hmm. where you start, it breaks down a lot of how you thought about your life. And it could go a lot of different ways. For some people, it's very healing because they had maladaptive patterns, behaviors, and they can stop those things. Like what you said about quitting smoking. People are like, wait, why am I doing this to myself? I should stop. But it can also be extremely difficult. And I think and the question here, and I don't know what the answer is, what is the opposite to that? What would pull you in the opposite direction to make sure you're not kind of losing yourself in that? And so I think that the answer I like better is integration. So when you use psychedelics, you kind of break down all of what you thought, and then you come out of it and you're shaking like a deer that was just born, right? And you don't know what to do with yourself. And then you have someone there who is holding the space for you and saying, it's okay, you're fine. This was difficult. Let's kind of hash it out. What did you feel? What do you think? How can we take this forward? How can you use these insights and make a better life for yourself? And also, if you think crazy things, stop thinking the crazy things. Those are crazy. Don't think those. So that's one answer. Another answer, and I think that is the other answer, is increasingly popular among underground therapists, is MDMA or 3-MMC, but largely MDMA. So first you feel like shit because you just took a bunch of mushrooms, and you feel like this was a harrowing experience. You feel bad, but the MDMA is going to make you feel good. It's going to make you feel all the love that you would be feeling out of a loving kindness meditation. And that'll balance you out. Whether or not that works, I think there's a lot of interest in it in the underground scene. There's no research on it yet. It's called, people refer to it as a stack. I think it would be interesting to study it scientifically.
Sorry, what's a stack?
It's, like you have any other stack, like a sleep stack of all the not pharmaceutical, the nutraceuticals you take to sleep better.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. So this stack, or it's also referred to as the MDMA sandwich, where you start with MDMA, take psilocybin, and then take MDMA again at the end. So I think it would be really interesting to run a study one day to compare the efficacy of that versus quality integration. Because I believe, for no good reason, I believe that working with a good therapist is much more important than taking drugs.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. For an unformulated answer, that was actually really, really good. That was very well thought out and organized.
Thank you.
Okay, Desmond has asked this again, so let's get to this question.
What's the question? I wasn't looking, sorry.
He asked, how does Rotem feel about psychedelic research in the 50s and 60s before LSD 25 became Schedule 1 drug?
So I'm just going to read that. Before, they were playing it fast and loose. And I understand. They were all very enthusiastic about it. They were taking the drugs and they were seeing really interesting things, and no one had done it before. And they felt like remember the climate was such of, everything's changing. This is it. Like, this is the age of Aquarius, right? Like, this is going to be peace and harmony. And so I think that's one reason why the research maybe wasn't so rigorous. Also, like I said before, remember, they didn't have our methods. I don't know how much you know about how we do science now versus then, but we are, like, when we look at the way they were doing things then, it kind of feels like, I don't know which analogy to use. Like when your kid looks at how much a certain stock moved today, and they're like, look, it went all the way up. And then you say, yeah, but if you just like click here on Google, it'll show you the 5-year trend. So yes, what happened today is not meaningless, but there's so much more to it. There's so much more that we can glean. And so I don't want to overstate how little we can learn from them. I think there's a lot to be learned. And actually, the reason I'm working with a historian right now is because a lot of those accounts have been discounted by scientists right now, because everyone's like, whatever. It's just like they didn't know what they were doing, and we just need to do everything all over again. And I think that's false. But I also think that we should take everything that they learned with a grain of salt. They didn't really have control groups. They didn't really have a lot of what we consider basic science now. So we use it to inspire new research, and we use it to confirm ideas. But yeah, I think it's hard to really rely on it confidently.
Okay. I want to go back to meditation and retreat for a minute. Or let's go down the second part of that. What are your thoughts on these psychedelic retreat centers that are popping up? I know ayahuasca is sort of the more famous one that a lot of people go after, but there's a lot of sort of underground stuff as well. I'm not sure how much you know about this, but in general, what are your thoughts on psychedelic retreats?
I feel like you read all my papers and you're just lining things up for me to respond, or maybe we just share a lot of interests. I wrote a paper with my colleague, Patrick Plessa. It was published a couple months ago. I don't remember what it's called. Something about self-help and psychedelics. And so Patrick is an expert in self-help. And we were just chatting about how well psychedelics lend themselves to the framework of self-help, because nobody knows anything. Anyone can self-proclaim themselves a guru. They know everything there is to know about psychedelics. They're going to teach you what you need to know, and just pay them $3,000 and you'll be good. At the end of the paper, I think so, he wrote most of what was about self-help, but I wrote maybe the last 5 pages of the paper, and it's a very, I felt very inspired to write about how bad things are right now. And I think so. You have these substances that are very powerful. We don't know exactly how they work and what they do, and we can't study them easily because they're illegal. So it leaves this gap for people to just show up and do whatever they want and start retreats. And there's no, if you want to do any psychotherapy is a protected act, at least in Canada. That means that only certain people are allowed to say, I am doing psychotherapy. People are psychologists, registered psychotherapists, physicians and nurses, and social workers. If you're not one of those people, you can't do it. If you're one of those people and you do it poorly, if you cause harm, you will lose your license. That would be very bad for you. It's tightly regulated. And those people don't even use psychedelics. They just like sit and talk to you. But with psychedelics, it could be so much more harmful with no supervision, no oversight, no training. I am very concerned about that. I'm surprised that nothing bad has happened yet. And I don't know if it's because something bad has happened, but somehow it was kept quiet, or because maybe I'm overly concerned for no good reason. Maybe these substances really are medicine, as people call them, and I should take a chill pill. But I think there's concern.
Well, there's this researcher out of McGill who writes about I forget the name slips me right now, but he writes about how this was with certain Amazonian tribes. This has been a big part of their culture for hundreds, thousands of years, and they figured they have these best practices on how someone would be a shaman and how they would take care of you if you're on ayahuasca.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like there's when you've been doing it for so long and you've had some experience that it's good, but I also get really, really afraid if, a bunch of people who've tried psychedelics a few times are like, I'm gonna and have some money, like I'm gonna go open up a psychedelic retreat center.
Yeah.
There's some. I do wish there's some type of SOP. It doesn't have to be super rigorous, but some framework by which we standardize some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a framework. You put a little statue of the Buddha, man. That's what you do. And I'm thinking, and like, it's by the same token, it's I think it's not culturally competent to say, well, they're doing it in Peru. Surely it's the same for us. And I'm thinking about myself. I've never done that, but I think that if I go to Peru and someone is singing in Spanish and blowing smoke on me, I would not feel comfortable. This is not my culture. I don't know what's going on, and I don't like this. And I think by the same token, think about this. Let's say you want to use psilocybin to help treat PTSD. You want to use it for refugees. And you think, which refugee? Here's an underserved population, the Muslims who ran away from Myanmar. And I'm going to do it with them. And then you do the same protocol where you have the little statue of the Buddha there, but alas, they were the people who kicked them out, the people who persecuted them were Buddhists. So they're taking psilocybin, all of a sudden there's this image of the Buddha there, and that may ruin their trip, that may cause harm. And so I think that an important SOP would be to ask people what's going on with them, and if they have preferences, if there's things that, and I think that this is something that is done better in studies and not done so much in these retreats, because I think the standard is 8 sessions in a study before you take psilocybin. Your therapist will get to know you a little bit. They'll know what your traumas are. You'll know where you're sensitive. There will always be mistakes, but I think that's not bad. In fact, I think it's so generous that it wouldn't be maybe scalable in the current mental health system we have. But if you go to a retreat, you show up there, the next day you're going to take drugs. They don't know anything about you. There may be something triggering there for you that could be dangerous, and no one will be any the wiser until you freak out. So I think that's a concern.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very, very fair.
Yeah.
Are there? Yeah, I think we've gone through a lot, and you've touched on a lot of interesting ideas. is there anything else you want to share with the audience, or anything that you think we might have missed in this conversation?
Yeah, I'm just going over the list in my head. For sure, I said test your substances. That's important. I said be wary of psychedelics research. Be wary of research in general if it's not pre-registered. Yeah, remember that psychedelics are not a panacea. There's no cure-all out there. And we need to be good to each other. And if someone is suffering, I know that psychedelics are powerful. I know that some people have had amazing experiences with them. I know that they've cured some people, but they're not going to cure everyone. And I know it's tempting to just tell your friend who's suffering, just take some mushrooms, man. It's going to be fine. And maybe it will be fine, but maybe it won't. So I think if the choice is between telling someone to take mushrooms and just spend a couple hours with them, or be supportive, be a good friend, be a good family member for them for a few hours over a couple of weeks, I would consider doing the latter, because this is, I think, like this speaks to what I was saying about the meaning crisis. I think a lot of the meaning crisis is also because we're so alienated, because we don't spend so much time and energy on each other anymore, and everything is just like we're very separate from each other, and we need each other. So yeah, be excellent to each other is what I would say.
Yeah, that's very well put. And that's probably a good note to end on. Thanks again, Rotem. Thanks, Chad, for bearing with us and asking all the questions that you did. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks for sharing your work and your journey and how you think about these things. Really, really appreciate it. And
yeah, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so happy that we got the chat. For much of the time, I didn't remember that we were on the air. You made me feel very comfortable, and yeah, this is so fun. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, Chad, thank you again for joining in. We'll see you on the next episode of At the Stoa.